Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. For those of you I've not seen before, I'm Louise and I'm the Twinkl Geography content lead. And I manage the primary content. We also have a wonderful secondary geography lead as well. And we are a growing team of geography specialists. We are a team with a real love of geography learning, and we're really enjoying working on the projects that we're working on at the moment, which I'll tell you a bit more in a moment. And we have a lot of teaching experience across Key Stage 1 and 2 in a range of settings, and we really do love to help those who teach geography. So if there's anything you ever need or anything you think we could help with, please do get in touch via Twinkl Cares so that we can do that. So today's session, we are focusing on building progressive map skills. So I'm going to start off, as you usually do, with some exciting updates to do with our current projects. And then we're going to look at why map skills are important, the importance of building mental maps, ensuring progression, some ideas for mapping activities, a little bit of information on digital mapping, a little bit of information about maps and geo-wanderers, and then looking at some of the geography team's favourite mapping activities as well. So our exciting updates at the moment focus around our geo-wanderers geography scheme, which is really starting to come to life now. We have got 6 units on site. There should be another on site by the end of the week as well. So soon to have 7 units on site, and that will be all the autumn suggested units to teach in autumn uploaded, which would be lovely, because it means that people can start using that scheme, and we're working very hard on getting the spring ones up ready for spring term as well. So the next one to be uploaded is likely to be mountains, and then volcanoes and earthquakes is on the way too soon. We'd also love for anybody who wants to test or give their opinions on the units. So if you are interested in that, then please do indicate on the feedback form if you'd like. It'd be happy for me to contact you by email, because it's really great to get that feedback so we can make sure that the scheme is really in line with what people are wanting and what people need. So just to share some of the units we've got on site so far. So we have got around our locality, which is a suggested year 1 unit but can be used across Key Stage 1. That's a suggested autumn unit for year 1. We have the United Kingdom, which is a suggested spring unit for year 1. We've got continents and oceans, which is a suggested autumn unit for year 2. We've got local land use, which is a suggested autumn unit for year 3, settlements, which is suggested autumn unit for year 4, and rivers and coasts, which is suggested autumn unit for year 6. And we are year 5 mountains is the suggested autumn unit. And like I say, that should be on site by the end of the week. So just a little bit more information about geo-wanderers. So why would you want to choose it as a school? So it's fully progressive. So geo-wanderers has been designed to ensure progression through topics that develop and build upon concepts. It's also got a fieldwork focus. It has both embedded fieldwork throughout the units and also full fieldwork units, which have full fieldwork inquiries, such as you can see here around our locality and local land use are fieldwork inquiry units. So there's a couple of them in autumn, and you can also see here an example of a fieldwork opportunity that takes place within a different lesson, which isn't a full fieldwork inquiry, but embedding those skills across the learning. You can also see here the progression of it as it builds up throughout the school. So it's also adaptable. So the plans are fully editable, and the resources are fully adaptable as well, which means that you can adapt to your students' needs. Each lesson has an activity menu with 3 or 4 choices. In fieldwork ones, it's 3 choices because that fits a little bit better. But in other units, it's 4 choices so that you can really choose and have the autonomy to choose the activities that suit your class or your students that you're working with. And there are also accessibility suggestions, both for the whole unit and for each lesson, to really help you adapt for additional needs. It's also rooted in retrieval practice. We have built-in retrieval activities, both the mini retrieval activities that you'll find within the assessment pack, but also remember activities for each lesson. And you'll see the show what you know tasks in the assessment materials. And there's also a show what you know quiz and a double page spread activity. So various different ways of carrying out assessment within that as well. It's streamlined to help it fit into your busy timetables. So each year group has 3 units of 6 lessons each. And it's fully aware of progression in place. So throughout the units, we revisit and develop in-depth understanding of places across topics. So we're not just visiting a place once in one topic, we are coming back to them from lots of different lenses. So what else does it offer? So we've got linked CPD, a growing collection of CPD to support the units. And where we don't have CPD, we're building it up so that once the full scheme is on site, there'll be CPD to sit alongside it as well. We have some linked animations starring our lovely characters, Yasmin and Claude the Cloud. We've got linked songs made by the fantastic Twinkl Tunes team to help learning stick through those fun songs. And you can see an example of the Oceans song there on the right. Then we've also got visual snapshot videos, which are a bit like the concept videos, but they're all visual. So they contain videos and photographs of places and processes. So for instance, we've got one for the cities, the capital cities of the UK. So you can use that one to really explore those places through videos and photographs in a quick snapshot. But we also have full concept videos, which help you to explore key topics and concepts through these engaging videos. So for the example we've got up there is what are human and physical features, but we've got lots of different ones now. For instance, we've got some to do with tectonic plates, we've got grid references. So there's lots of different ones coming through. And again, that's a growing collection. So keep an eye on those because we're constantly adding lots to those as well. So moving on to today's focus then. So why are map skills important? So I think you often find that there's a lot of people say that, we have sat navs now, these children are never likely to need to use a paper map. It's not really an important thing anymore. But that's something that I hugely disagree with. I think it's so important because those skills are not just about us being able to use a paper map. Those skills help us build that map perception and the ability to interpret and use map information, which then helps us to use those more modern day things like sat navs. So as well as being an important part of the curriculum, map skills are that vital life skill that helps us to interpret that spatial information, to find our way around places, to help us organise and plan things. And with a wealth of information at our fingertips, being able to question and interpret the accuracy of it is so important. Maps can be an incredible tool, but they can also be used with quite a lot of bias. So it can be very important that children have those ways of being able to analyse and check information as well to help them understand the world. We also use maps far more often than we realise and in many different ways. So it might be shopping centre maps, it might be sat navs, it might be planning a holiday, or it might be maps with information in magazines and newspapers. They come up so much more often than we realise. So it's really it really is an incredibly important skill, and having fluency really gives us access to that information. So first of all, I thought in the chat it'd be interesting to explore, how do you think you use maps in your daily life, just to see how often we're using them. So if you can think of any ways that you use them in your daily life, please do drop those into the chat. So for me, I'd say that in my role, I obviously probably use maps more in my daily life than many people do. But if I try and think outside of that, I use them to check the weather maps before I go on a dog walk. I might click on a news article and have to interpret the information on the map to understand what the news article is saying. I love fiction stories with maps as well. So I might be using those within the story that I'm reading as well. I use even my mental map of the supermarket to think when I'm making my list, to make sure that I'm, going to have things on my list in the right order, or interpret the sat nav to get to places. So there are lots of different ways which we use maps in our daily life. So that's just a little one to help us really think about that, and think about how it's not something we use in isolation, or just if we want to go walking up a mountain. They are, they're an integral part of our daily life. So what does the key research say about maps? So starting off with the geography subject report from 2003, had the weakest form of geographical knowledge in almost all schools is procedural knowledge. And leaders rarely consider how to plan a curriculum for procedural knowledge in the same way as they do for substantive knowledge. So we might be very good at planning out exactly what knowledge is going to be taught in our lessons, but are we thinking about the knowledge they need to be able to do something? So that's what we mean by procedural knowledge. It's that knowledge that children have that allows them to carry out a skill. So, for example, they may consider when best to teach pupils substantive knowledge about how water acts in a meander, but they don't necessarily consider when best to teach pupils about choropleth maps. Now, that is a very secondary example there that's given in the subject report, but it can be just as easily applied to, have we considered exactly when we are going to teach compass points, when we're going to teach grid references, when we're going to think about pattern finding on maps, when we're going to think about, drawing maps to scale. All of those kind of things are things that come in more at primary. And have we thought about the knowledge they need to be able to complete those skills? So that's an interesting point that it brings up there. It says pupils are also given few opportunities to develop their skills in using this procedural knowledge, as they do not return to it and practice it until fluent. So that's another really interesting thing brought up there, is that we might have these things built into our curriculum and think, right, we've thought about when we're going to teach grid references and they're going to do it in this unit, but have we then thought about where they're going to get those opportunities to return to grid references and practice it and have a go at using it in different contexts until they're actually fluent in that skill? So that's another really interesting point being brought up there. So another thing it says is that pupils' procedural knowledge and their fluency or skill in using it was very varied. In schools where leaders had planned how pupils would make progress in learning these geographical skills, pupils were able to demonstrate their competence. For example, some pupils could explain why geographers use different ways of presenting data or how to use maps in different ways. However, in many schools, pupils have very little knowledge of this aspect of the subject, and this was often because they were introduced to something once, but then again, given no time to practice it. So that's kind of explaining that again. So really thinking about where those opportunities exist in your curriculum for children to be able to practice those skills and that procedural knowledge once it's been introduced. It also said that access to high quality, up-to-date resources is important in implementing the geography curriculum. The national curriculum sets out some resources that pupils should become more proficient in using through their schooling. These include different types of maps, including topographical as well as topological maps, maps at various scales, and both digital maps and maps in hard copy. They also include atlases, globes, aerial and satellite imagery, and GIS. So topographical, we just mean in terms of showing the topography of the place, whereas topological is a more information-based map where a lot of the detail has been stripped away. In terms of maps at various scales, these might be OS maps, these might be world maps, these might be maps of very specific places. And obviously digital maps, there are lots of different ways that those can be accessed as well. But that's a really important point, I think, that's coming through here as well. And you'll see this in some of the other quotes too, that importance of having a balance of digital technology maps and maps in hard copy within your curriculum and not relying too much on one or the other. GIS is often thought of as a very secondary thing, and in terms of the curriculum, it very much is. But there are ways that you can bring quite simple GIS into primary map work as well. It can be through systems like Digimaps for schools, or it can be, through the ways that you use certain, online mapping tools such as Google Maps and that kind of thing. So there are ways of bringing those graphical information systems in as well at primary. So they also said that subject leaders in almost all schools said that they had the resources they needed to teach geography well. However, many leaders were not aware of what other resources might be available to help pupils learn geography. For example, leaders did not know what equipment might support for teaching pupils to carry out fieldwork. They were unaware of digital packages that would have helped them to teach GIS if they chose to do so in this phase. Physical copies of maps were rarely used in lessons unless they were being used to teach map skills. These maps and skills were rarely applied to other parts of the curriculum. So that kind of brings up a very similar thing, really. It's kind of that balance between that digital and also from having those physical maps as well. So having those digital systems, and I can't tell you which ones to use. There are some really good ones out there. I would always say, if you can afford it, it's good to investigate having a look at Digimaps, because they do have some excellent school things, and I'll explain some things later that we can have to help you with Digimaps as well. But I think it's also building that awareness for yourself of what things are out there to make sure that you have got the best tools in your school that you can afford, but making sure that we are getting that balance so that we're not just moving completely over to digital maps, and that children are still getting to handle those physical copies of maps as well. So in a minority of schools, leaders have thought carefully about how to teach geography in a distinctive way. At its best, this involved pupils being taught the processes of geographical inquiry. They were introduced to geographical questions and presented with data in its widest sense, including images, maps, and people's testimonies, as well as graphs and charts. They then used this data to reach conclusions. Now, not much of this quote is actually about maps, but I included it just to remind us of the importance of including maps within our field work as well. And we might be doing lots of map work within class when we're looking at places. It might be that we're doing lots of map work when we're teaching new skills and things like that. But it's important that we are using them out in the field as well, whether that be having a map that they can use to plan a route and follow a route on, or whether that be creating a sketch map as part of their field work to collect data, or whether that be using it in some data analysis within some sort of embedded field work within a different topic. So moving on to the research review series, which was in 2021. So this said, within geographical skills, pupils learn to interpret spatial representations, particularly maps, globes and atlases, and construct their own plans and maps. Pupils also draw on these skills to support their knowledge of environmental, physical and human systems, and also to gain a sense of place. This aspect of geography is widening as governments and commerce recognise the value of it and technology advances. Pupils need to learn how to interpret resources such as aerial photography, satellite imagery and digital mapping. As well as thinking about the technical or procedural knowledge that pupils need, teachers and leaders also need to ensure that pupils can apply that knowledge. Consequently, the integration of this aspect with other aspects of geography is important. So that's a really nice quote, which reminds us kind of, again, of that balance between the two, of how important that advancing in technology is and making sure that we're bringing in that digital mapping, but also that integration with the other aspects of geography to make sure that we're not seeing mapping as a standalone thing, that we are sort of marrying those things up and teaching mapping in context rather than as a standalone. So that was quite, a lot of those were quite wordy. So what are the key messages that come from that research? So the key messages I would say coming from that is have a progression plan for teaching procedural knowledge. So map out where it will be taught and where it will be built upon. So those opportunities where children will get to practice it and help to build that fluency. Ensure that there are opportunities to revisit and practice using that knowledge with maps, and source a range of different maps for your curriculum, including topographical, ordnance survey, digital mapping, atlases, globes, and aerial and satellite imagery. I'd also say ensure physical maps are not forgotten in favour of digital mapping. That was something that the review found, so it's important to make sure that you have still got those physical maps within your curriculum. Investigate the best digital tools that you can access. Make sure maps form part of your data sources in your geography lessons, including your fieldwork, and ensure that real maps are used in geographical contexts. So whilst maps such as pirate treasure maps or particular mapping lessons have their place, in a high quality geography curriculum, the majority of map skills should be taught and applied in context. So that's really worthwhile remembering as well. So what I'd like to know in the chat, is there anything where you think you would, any actions you think you would take away from the research that you're thinking, oh, actually thinking about that research, I think it would be really good to do this in our school. I'm just interested to see if anybody has anything that they're going to take away from that research, as that might give ideas to other people as well. I think if it was for me, obviously, I'm no longer in school, but when I was a subject lead in school, I think I would have to think really carefully about the range of maps used in units, and thinking about where, really planning in where that procedural knowledge would be identified and where it would first be taught, and then where it would be revisited as well. And I think, like somebody said in the chat, the physical maps, not just digital, really thinking about where those can be built in and which is most appropriate for which, or whether both need to be used. So, but I also think for me in my current role, that it's about me working with my team for us to think carefully about the range of maps that we use in our GeoWanderers units, and build in places to make sure that they're getting opportunities to apply those procedural skills as we continue to write the units. So that's something we'll definitely be bearing in mind. So the importance of mental maps. So a mental map refers to someone's perception of their surroundings and how they use this to navigate the environment around them. So it's sort of like the mapping we keep in our brain. So mental maps are ever changing as we add information from things we see, hear, and learn about. Our experiences and our education play a key part in helping us form our mental maps. They help us to plan routes, estimate distances. Even in our early childhood, we're starting to learn, as soon as we start to learn to crawl, to walk, we're starting to navigate around objects and starting to build our spatial awareness and build our mental map of places. And by using maps in context in our lessons and carrying out fieldwork, this gives children more experience of real places to be able to add to their mental maps. And I think from the moment we start exploring that early environment, we start to build that mental map. And with really careful planning, we can enhance children's mental maps and boost their skills in being able to interpret and analyze and use maps. So the more experience and information we add to our mental maps, that makes them more accurate, because we're constantly adding this information. And so everybody's mental map will be slightly different. And because that information is being built up from not only the places we've experienced, but also the places that we've seen. There might be things that we've seen on TV, that we've read in magazines. There might be places we've learned about at school that all build to that mental map. And as all our experiences are different, our mental maps are too. And they're not just built, like I say, for those places we've been to, but those we see and we learn about. And that's why it's so important for us to be using a range of maps regularly across our curriculum. And by that, I don't necessarily just mean in geography. I also mean having those opportunities to use maps in history, to use maps in science, to use them in English, and right across the curriculum, so that they're really getting that regular experience of using maps and adding to those mental maps on a regular basis, not just in their geography units. And making sure by doing that, we can make sure that they're being built on accurate information as they're regularly added to, rather than biased information that they might come across from other places. Also use variation. I'd be interested to know, have you ever presented learners with maps that are upside down or not Eurocentric, or that have sections missing? Sometimes by varying the presentation of a map, we encourage them to view in different ways, which helps them to make connections. And you'll find some of this in our, particularly in our continents and oceans GeoWanderers unit, where we've really tried to find ways to help them be able to recognise the continents in different orientations, or on their own when they're not a part of a map, or pick out the one that's missing, and those kind of activities. And if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about how to use that variation, there's a really good blog by Sam Hall called Maps and Variation Theory, and that explores some really interesting ways to do that with continent maps. And that was sort of it, we really looked at that when we were thinking about planning our continents and oceans unit as well. So it's a really interesting one to read that. So mental maps also don't have to stay in our heads. We can get our learners to put their mental maps down on paper, and that can tell us a lot about their spatial awareness and knowledge of their surroundings, or an area that they're learning about. So they don't always need to have a picture or a place in front of them, or be in a place to draw a map. Sometimes, whether it be, a quick jot on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, or whether it be a more sort of intricate task, it can tell you a lot about what they know about a place. It can tell you a lot about their spatial awareness, about their understanding of scale. So there's a lot you can learn from getting children to put their mental maps down on paper. And it can be a great formative or summative assessment tool by finding out at the end of a unit what they understand about a place, or it could tell you at the start what misconceptions there are that need to be addressed through that unit. So mental maps can be a great tool in that sense as well. So I'd love to know, I can see here from the last question that we've got some really interesting things in the chat saying about atlases being a must. And I think that's so true. I will always advocate for, really trying to convince your senior leadership team for having a set of atlases in each classroom. I know it is hard to afford and it's difficult, but I find that it's such a tool that they love dipping into. So I think that's so important as well. But I'd love to know if there are any activities that you've found that work particularly well to build children's understanding and knowledge of maps. I think for me, I'd say that it starts with mapping places they have experience of first. So starting with things like the classroom, and then moving out to the school grounds, the local area, but also having that experience of being in the map. So if you're going out to look around the local area, have they got maps in their hands? Can they say, oh, I'm standing in that bit now? And being able to plan simple routes and carry them out and see if those routes works. Those are, some really nice ideas that I think work really well. Lovely to see that. Yeah, year 2, mapping your journey to school. It's bringing that familiar in, isn't it? And if it's their journey to school, it's something they do regularly, and they're going to recognise those landmarks along the way and things like that. And that's also really nice inclusive activity as well, because it recognises that not everybody comes to school the same way. Not everybody necessarily lives as close to the school. Some people live further away. So that's a really lovely activity to be carrying out. So ensuring progression. Now, this can be tricky as a subject leader. And so I want us to think about how we can build progressive map skills across our settings and to let you know that you're not on your own. So first of all, I'd think about starting an EYFS. Think about where and how maps are used and ensure that there's regular access to both real and story-based maps in continuous provision. It can sometimes be an area that gets a bit overlooked in continuous provision. People think, we do lots of geography in the EYFS because we study these places and we look at these places around the world, and it comes in through our learning about different viewpoints and different festivals and all of that kind of thing. And all of that is amazing and just what we want to see. But are they experiencing maps through those things? And, can maps be a really interesting addition in continuous provision, whether they be historical, whether they be old OS maps, whether they be atlases, whatever it is you want to provide in there, whether it even be, that there are some digital options that can be provided for them to use within their continuous provision as well. It's definitely an area that's worth some thought and some discussion with your EYFS lead to see where they might come across maps within their curriculum at the moment, and if there are any ways in which that can be improved. To help with that, if you take a look at our Geo Wanderers progression map, which is this one at the top here, that does have some links to some EYFS documents that can help you with geography in the EYFS as well, not just for maps, but for a variety of things. And then you'll also find our mapping. So our maps progression for Geo Wanderers is contained within that whole that whole map document. So our progression mapping document, it has a maps column, and you'll be able to find that. Eventually, we do intend to create a maps progression document separately as well, so that you can easily see where those map skills are, but that will come a bit later once we've built more of the curriculum up. We've also got within our classic content line, we also have a map skills progression. So it's a suggested one. It's a kind of example one. So it doesn't link to Geo Wanderers. It doesn't link to any particular curriculum. It's just if you're looking for a starting point for something to base it on, that can be a really nice one to use as well. And if you want to look in a little bit more detail than we have time for today, then there is the progression in map skills video, which focuses very much on progression and how you can build that up through the different parts of map skills throughout your curriculum as well. So lots of different bits and pieces to help you there. So in terms of ensuring progression, map skills are often split into using maps and creating maps. And to plan progression well, it's important that we decide at which point in our curriculums that different map skills will be taught and when they'll be revisited. And using maps can be split into decoding, analysing, route finding and interpreting. So there's quite a few different areas that come into using maps. And far more focus is given in the curriculum to using maps, especially at Key Stage 2. But it is incredibly important that children continue to work on creating them as well. And I don't necessarily say drawing them, because there are so many different ways that they can make a map within their geography lessons that I don't think it's always about drawing. But it is important that even though that's not necessarily a specific curriculum statement in terms of them creating maps other than sketch maps, I think it is very important those skills continue to build up from Key Stage 1 so that they're ready for Key Stage 3. So it's important to consider a variety of mapping areas when breaking this down for progression. So for using maps, you want to be thinking about where they're going to learn atlas skills, where they're going to use compass points, grid references, where they're going to build an awareness of map symbols, where they're going to be describing and following routes, where they're going to be interpreting maps using a key, locating places on maps, where they're going to be reading information from maps. At what point are they going to start identifying patterns on maps? Quite often that's something that comes in Key Stage 2, but it can fit quite nicely into lower Key Stage 2 as well. For instance, in our volcanoes unit that we've got coming up that will be released soon, they start to look at the location of tectonic plates and the pattern of volcanoes around those tectonic plates and the pattern of earthquakes, and they can then build on that when they get later on into the mountains unit, and they start to see how those different patterns are similar and how those different patterns are different. You might want to also think about how they understand and begin to use scale on maps. That can start very early. We often think of scale in terms of being a sort of, upper Key Stage 2 mathematical thing. But when we talk about it in its geographical terms, we can really think about how we're going to start with that really beginning to use early scale. So it might be things like a year 1 class creating a map and talking to them about, say they're creating a messy map, and you'll say to them, right, which do you think would be good to use for the school hall? Because, this one's much bigger, this one's much smaller. So which one should we use for the school hall? Which one should we use for the school field? Which one would be better for the toilet block, and things like that. And just starting them to start to appreciate that different things on maps are a different size for different reasons. So that scale can be really broken down into those small steps to help build up their understanding as we go. And using latitude and longitude is another one. Really interesting to kind of think about where that's going to be introduced and where that can be applied in context. So as I kind of already mentioned, each of these skill areas need to be broken down into those smaller steps so that you can carefully choose where it will be introduced, where it will be revisited, and where it will be applied. And this is a process I'm very, very familiar with, because as we've built GeoWanderers, that's something we've very carefully done with not just with map skills, but with everything, is to really think about at what point we're introducing something, where it will be revisited, and where we can find opportunities to apply it in context and practice that skill as well. So for creating maps, there are also different areas to think about. So that might include annotating maps. It might be adding to maps. It might be creating sketch maps or creating different types of maps, such as messy maps and natural maps, so that they experience all sorts of different things. They might be refining sketch maps to present data, or devising a suitable key, or beginning to use scale when creating maps if we're thinking about upper Key Stage 2. And although there are less areas here for creating maps, they're all important skills that still need breaking down across the year groups and time to practice and apply skills. And all of this might sound quite daunting when I say about breaking it down into those small steps, but I would say, there is no need to start that on your own. It's a process that, we're not the only people out there. There are other ones out there that you can use as well, but it's a process that we have done as part of our example map skills progression map, and it is something we've done as part of our GeoWanderers progression map as well. So, don't feel like you're on your own with it, because we have these resources that are there that will help you with that too. So I'd be really interested to know then, what work needs doing in your school to improve your progression in map skills? Is there anything you can think of where you really think, actually, that's what I would need to do to improve the progression in my school? And I think for me, when I was a subject lead, it would have been thinking about carefully planning where different resources were used. I think we were quite good at the progression in the creating maps, and we were able to really plan in where those different skills would be taught and how that would build up across the year groups. I'm not sure we were as good at doing that with interpreting different types of maps and really thinking about things like where identifying patterns would start to be introduced, or where they might start collecting data on maps in fieldwork and things like that. So I think for me, that would have been one of the big things. Really interesting to see some different things being dropped into the chat as well. Definitely more opportunities to revisit, isn't it? It's easy to kind of sort of think, right, we've taught that skill, and it does require a lot of working together with the teachers in your school, doesn't it, to really think about, right, if we've taught that in year 3, where is it going to be revisited in year 4 and year 5? It can't really be done in isolation in a classroom. So that's really important. It's a really lovely activity that somebody's popped in there about saying when they taught year 1, they took the children on a walk in the local area and gave the children an A4 poster with local landmarks so that they were spotting them and finding each other's landmark. And when they found it, they could have their photo taken pointing to it. That sounds like a really lovely activity to really build those mental maps up. I can see somebody here saying field work would be an important place to improve that progression of map skills as well, making sure that they're getting used out in the field as well. And somebody else saying that they're really looking at rebuilding the geography curriculum to make sure that they've got progression in field work and in all areas, including mapping. So yeah, absolutely. To that person, please do take a look at Geo Wanderers, because we have worked really hard to make sure that we're building in that progression in for field work and mapping. So if you need some help with that, please do look at that. It's very, like I say, it's adaptable and editable, so you can use it in the way that does suit your school. So some ideas for some mapping activities. It's always nice when you come along to something like this to take some ideas away that you can use. And as you will do get a PDF copy of this, they can be taken to staff meetings and things like that if you like as well. So first of all, a little quote from the research review series from 2021, which just says a little bit about the kind of things that you might want to include in a high quality geography curriculum. So in a high quality geography curriculum, plans introduce pupils to different types of mapping, including topological and thematic mapping as they progress through Key Stage 2 and secondary education. A high-quality geography curriculum also includes sufficient opportunity for pupils to practice decoding information from maps, constructing or encoding maps, analysing distributions and relationships, route finding, and interpreting the information to draw conclusions. So if you are thinking about where you're going to map these things into your progression, that can be a really good starting point to really think about splitting up the decoding, the constructing, the analysing of distribution and relationships, the route finding and the interpreting and drawing conclusions, and thinking about where those fit within your geography lessons and within your curriculum. So some examples. So some mapping activities here for using maps. So maps in stories is an amazing one. There are so many books, whether picture books or chapter books, that have fascinating maps that help place the story and help them really think about the landmarks and where the story takes place. And exploring those can really help bring maps alive. One of my favorites is Quest by Aaron Becker. That's a really lovely one where it takes you through the story and you've got the map at the start, and it's really, really nice one. It's a non-worded picture book, so it can be used right across the key stages as well. Henry's Maps, a lovely one that I've used with Key Stage 1 by David Elliott. That is all about a pig called Henry who maps out the farm, and it's really great for misconceptions as well, because it can we had lots of talks about, why wouldn't we put the sheep on our map? Oh, because they move around and that kind of thing. So it was really nice for those kind of misconceptions. And Martha Maps It Out is another lovely one by Lee Hodgkinson as well. So really nice ones to look at there. Another thing I'd say for using maps is get outside. And I know somebody said that's something that they would want to work on in their school. So using things like, you might have GPS if you've got school phones and things that you can use, or tablets with data, that kind of thing. Using aerial photographs when you're out and about, so that they can start to see the real thing against the satellite image or the aerial photograph. Children can plan and take routes through the school grounds or local area. It's always really nice. We're so often very good at mapping the routes, and this is something I've done myself, is we map a route, but do we actually take them out and let them test their directions? Doesn't have to be a case of going out in your local environment, because I know that involves lots of adults. It can just be a case of doing maps of your school grounds and then going out and testing them out. And, does it work to get from the school hall to the library? Does it work to get from year 1 to year 6? Can they, can they plan those routes and use things, whether it be, compass directions, directional language, whether it be actually, drawing a map of it where they then somebody has to follow it to get to that place. There are lots of ways with getting out in the field where you can use those maps and really put them into context. So another one for using maps is find the key landmarks. So it's a play a back-to-back game or a hidden map game where you give children landmarks in a particular place. So it might be somewhere very familiar to them, or it might be a place that you're learning about. And by guessing a particular specific grid square, and the partner can explain if they've landed on the sea, the land, or a specific landmark, and they then draw the landmark on. And then at the end of that, they compare their maps and see if their map matches. So that can be a really nice activity for using oracy and speaking and listening within your geography activities. But it's also really great for becoming familiar with new places and introducing them to maybe some of the key human and physical features they might find in those places. Geocaching is another really interesting one. It can be a great way to explore the local area and use map skills for a real purpose. It's not something I'm going to try and explain now because there are huge amounts of guides online that explain how to do this far better than I can, but it can be really interesting and really exciting to them to be able to use map skills to actually find something and to actually discover something, and then that fun of being able to then hide it again so that somebody else can find it as well. Stepping into the map is another activity that I love. So by using string or masking tape to mark out a grid, or by using a large map underneath, on Twinkl, we sometimes have, maps that can be printed out on a number of sheets of paper. And there are some like this within GeoWanderers as well. And by using a large map underneath, children can physically climb into and experience the map. Another alternative to that is creating the grid outside to allow children to add their landmarks in chalk. It can be really great for practicing compass points, route planning, grid references, even things like locational knowledge. I know there are times when I would draw quite a basic United Kingdom map on the playground, and then, you can get them to run to the Atlantic Ocean, to run to the Arctic Ocean, and so on, so that they're practicing where those different places are. So there's lots of different ways you can make it really physical with them as well. Real life patterns is another really interesting one for using maps, and it does kind of come a bit under using, but also a bit under creating. But it's a really great way to encourage decoding, analysing and interpreting of maps. So it could be used for a number of different topics, but if you have a large map in the classroom, then a really nice way to add data to it can be with pins. So, for example, you might have a map of your school, and if you're doing some field work on wildlife or biodiversity, you might add pins to that map as to where the wildlife was found in the school grounds, or where different flowers were found in the school grounds, that kind of thing. And that could really help with analysing patterns in biodiversity, because they're not just then having the information they've collected on their own sketch map, they're all putting their data together to create a wider picture where they can then analyse patterns and discover things. So that if you have room for that in your classrooms, that can be a really nice way of kind of bringing in collecting data on a map, but also that brings in that analysing and interpreting of information as well. Maps and atlases in the reading corner. I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but if we only ever get these out in lessons, then we're not building that familiarity. I'd say it's also one of their absolute favourite choices. I had so many children in my previous classes that just loved getting the atlas out. And yes, they do get a bit dogged. They do get a bit, not as well looked after as they might do if they're kept in the specific, atlas shelf or in the library or something like that. But it's worth it to build that familiarity for them to find that interest and really love exploring the different maps and the different places. And they learn so much from doing that, from that kind of independence that they get from their reading. So then some activities now for creating maps. So thinking about how they can apply their knowledge of places and develop understanding of scale and spatial representation by creating maps. So messy maps are one way. These are great for building spatial understanding. We talked about this a little bit earlier, didn't we, about asking children to make choices between different classroom materials or collage materials to help them represent features, gets them to think about beginning to compare size, shape, distance, and think about what might be the best thing to use for that. And you can use everything from, bits from your art cupboard, collage materials. You can think about using natural materials within the classroom. You could even just use classroom resources, things like pens, rubbers, pencils can all be used in that way as well. So the great thing about messy maps is you can use almost anything for them. Natural maps are very similar in the choices that children can make. but this time using resources from the natural environment, and they can be great to be used as part of outdoor learning or part of field work, because they can be created directly in the places that they're experiencing. You can see an example of one here made with sticks and leaves, and again you can see where you'd be able to have that conversation of, I think this one was about the positioning of the school and the different places within the school, and you can see, you know, we'd have that conversation about, you know, those smaller sticks or those leaves can be used nicely to represent the houses, whereas the longer sticks are great for representing the roads, or that round stone representing the roundabout, whereas that large chunk of wood is great for representing the school building. So all of those kind of conversations that you have are constantly building up that scale, spatial representation, and those mental maps within their heads as they're making those choices. Edible maps is another fun one. A really fun way to explore topography. This can be great fun, particularly with Key Stage 2. You know, if you're doing a topic like mountains, chocolate chips can make great mountains, coloured sweets can make great landmarks, you know, laces for rivers or roads, that kind of thing. And the best bit about it, which I enjoy, is that they can eat their map at the end as well. So always a good one to make sure they take a photograph of it first, maybe. Mapping a journey is another one. So mini books can be really great for mapping small sections of a journey and building route planning skills. So if you have a little mini book, then each page can sort of represent a different part of a journey. So say it's a journey around your school grounds or your local area, each part may represent a little section of that journey, so that they're building up the map in smaller parts at a time and really focusing on the order of the route. So that can be a really nice activity as well for you, creating little mini books. Don't underestimate the power of adding to maps as well. Sometimes creating a whole map can be too much, or might take up too much of the lesson, or might not give you quite what you want to focus on. Whereas providing a partially drawn map that children can add to can really help them focus on either particular sections of the map, or it can provide support for those who might need additional support or scaffolding, or for those struggling with spatial representation. And I would say with that, it's worth bearing in mind, it's not always those children you would expect that struggle with spatial representation. It can be something that some children can really struggle with. And so being able to provide them with that support can really help. But it also can help you focus in on a really specific area if they're not having to worry about everything else around it, and you just want them to focus on this one specific part that they're mapping. It can be really good for that as well. Tracing paper maps are also another really nice one, where you put the tracing paper on top of a map and they focus on mapping the patterns on top of it. So it could be that they're, you know, mapping the pattern of a river's flow, or they could be mapping a particular topography, or there's all sorts of ways that you could do it on there. They could be mapping out human and physical features, and then peeling back the tracing paper allows them to compare with and without the pattern, so they can see it with the background behind it, but they can also identify it in isolation, giving them that sort of that easier to read map, really, that just contains the data that they need. And I would say as well that these techniques can be done really well in books, but they can also be done really successfully with digital mapping tools too. There are very similar techniques that you can use to the tracing paper maps, where you can take away the background, put the background on, that kind of thing, or where you can provide them with a map that they can then add information to. For instance, being able to draw out sections of land use and things like that can be really successfully done with digital mapping tools as well. And I've just popped on here some resources. These will be clickable when you get your PDF version through. And some of these are things that would allow you to use it in context within a particular topic. Others might be for use within other lessons and allow you to apply mapping skills. And others might just be those things that are more practice activities that aren't necessarily in context, but could be used for an early morning activity or something like that. So we've got this penguin habitats map, which comes with a sort of comprehension type activity with it. So it's a sort of map reading activity where they can draw information from the map and the information around it to help them answer the questions. There's also this seaside compass points map, which allows them to practice compass points, but in the real context of seasides, using a real aerial photograph. There's the map labelling pack, which helps focus on those locational knowledge skills. There's a school map activity where they can cut and stick and build up or draw onto it to help them build up a map of their school or their classroom. And there's some really nice local area compass point cards there as well that can be used to, that can be adapted really nicely to add in a particular topic. So there's like blanked out. So you might say, how would you get to the school hall? And then they'd have to plan their compass directions out to do it. So those are very adaptable to whichever setting you want to use them in. We've also got some for specific places. So we have nice Lake District mapping activity. We've got Brazil map reading activity. There's Japan, New Zealand. So we've got various ones. And as always, I will say if there's a specific, grid reference, compass point, or just other mapping activity that you're looking for, please do let us know and request it, and we'll see if it's something that can be made. But on that topic, to help, there's also the blank coordinates grid that we have, which basically is a editable document where you can take a picture of your local area and pop it behind the grid. So all you have to do is just use the layering within the document to make sure the grid's at the front, and then you'll be able to use those coordinates on your local map or a map of the place that you're studying as well. Different types of map is a lovely PowerPoint as well, because it really does explore lots of different types of map that they might not have come across before. So that can be nice if you're looking at things like that. We also have some interactive mapping activities where children can complete quizzes and help them practice their locational knowledge as well. And then these are probably more the sort of ones. Some of them are in context, for instance, the oceans one, but we also have things like pirate maps here, or Halloween compass points, football compass points, which is more the sort of things that you might want for practicing those skills once they've been introduced in context, practicing for an early morning work or a wet play activity or something like that. They're really nice for those kind of things. The London Landmarks map has been incredibly popular as well as sort of a very basic way of showing some of the simple landmarks that they might see for Key Stage 1. And we also have these lovely outdoor activities cards as well, which include lots of map type activities and outdoor geography activities that you can carry out for compass points as well. So they're a really nice one to do out in the field as well. And then we also have map symbols activities that you can use for various things. With Diwali coming up, we have a nice Rangoli pattern coordinates activity, which is nice for doing as part of a festival to bring your geography skills in. And again, these are sort of more your kind of themed activities like football and pirates, where you can bring those that treasure map into for something like a morning work or something like that, or for a practice activity. So I'd love to know any specific mapping activities that have worked really well for you in your classroom. I've shared lots of mine. I can see already somebody's popped in there that they like to use PE equipment to mark out maps. And yeah, that's one I've definitely done, to particularly when thinking about directional language and routes and compass points and that kind of thing. The sort of, can they guide their robot around the PE equipment? And that links in so well with that sort of computing unplugged algorithms as well. It doesn't just have to link into your geography. It can be great cross-curricular stuff, that too. So yeah, if anybody's got any other lovely activities they use, we'd love to hear them. Yeah, hiding treasure around the playground. That's a great one, isn't it? And children will follow the maps to find it. I've done that with local area as well, which I think I've popped on my slide towards the end too. So that's a really lovely idea, giving them a real purpose behind their map reading, of wanting to actually go out and find something. That's really important. So also, I did mention to you that I would talk to you about some things about digital mapping. Or just before I do that, there's another lovely idea that's popped into the chat, which is journey sticks. They're lovely, where you get a stick and you map out the different parts of the journey along that stick for the journey that you've taken. That again is just like those mini books, allows you to split it into those little parts of the journey and help them focus on a specific place and what that place is like. So yeah, love journey sticks as well. Fantastic one. So for digital mapping, we do have a partnership with Digimaps, and these resources have been created by our amazing computing team, who have obviously lots of digital knowledge and are trying to break it down to make it as easy as possible for you to use. And I've popped a few of them on here, but if you pop Digimaps into our search as well, you'll find that there are lots of other ones as well. That is the one that we've got a partnership with, but that doesn't mean there aren't a variety of digital tools out there that can be used for online mapping. There's lots of lovely ones that, you know, don't require a subscription as well. Lots of ways that you can use things like Google Maps or Street View. Just another reminder again to make sure we're using a variety of maps, not just the digital ones. But I'd also say for creating maps, using a digital tool can be really great for adding to maps, for practicing skills, for creating digitally. And some of those are aimed directly at schools, such as Digimap for Schools and ArcGIS. So it's worth reaching out to them and seeing, you know, what they can offer. And there are huge amounts of tutorials out there for how to use those things. They produce a lot on their websites as well. But on our website, we've got things like digital mapping. Can you find activities for Key Stage 1? There's also the UK Rivers Study, which is a really nice one, thinking about how you can use Digimaps to support with that. And definitely the most popular in the collection is the using Digimaps for Schools for grid references as well. That's an incredibly popular one too. Oh, I seem to have clicked on that. There we go. And just a sort of little thing to go over mapping in Geo Wanderers. So map skills build progressively and are a key part of all units. So coming soon, we have got our map skills progression map, as I spoke about. Our skills are taught in context using real maps. We have lots of Ordnance Survey maps built into our units now, so check those out as well. Children also have opportunities to create sketch maps in the field and refine those to communicate their data. And maps are used purposefully to help make links, discover key information and solve problems. So just to say that within Geo Wanderers, we are working on doing an awful lot of those things we talked about today. So it's well worth a look to see if it can help you with those things in your school as well. We also have some CPD and concept videos that can help you with that, which you can find links to here as well. So we've got progression in map skills, which I mentioned earlier. We've also got a map skills subject knowledge one for Key Stage 1, and we're working on one for Key Stage 2. And we have 2 Key Stage 2 ones for sketch maps as well, and grid references that can be used with your classes to help teach them about it as well. So those are the more child-facing videos, where the CPD are the more adult-facing ones. So just to finish off then with the geography team's favourite mapping activities. So Jane is an experienced teacher and she is one of our Twinkl Geography content writers, and she loves creating maps for transition. So she said, one of my favourite mapping activities was when our junior school invited next year's intake to visit the current year 3. Children were given a map or plan of the whole school and they had to follow a route on the map around the school. Not only did they learn about the school, but they were also route finding and using maps for a purpose. And then Mike Carriott is also an experienced teacher and tutor and was a geography subject leader. And he is our Twinkl Geography team leader. And he liked creating beastly maps. So one of his favourite mapping activities was when the beast of Bodmin Moor visited the school, and the beast had left evidence around the school, and the children who had maps of the school and the grounds had to find the evidence and add the locations to their map using a symbol. Once completed, they used the map to determine the most likely location of the beast's den. They then created a map and directions to locate the den, where there was a reward at the end of the trail. So my favourite mapping activity was creating nature maps of the school grounds, which I talked about quite a bit earlier. And this meant children had to think very carefully about the choices they made to represent different areas and introduce those basic ideas of scale. So Hannah is also an experienced teacher and subject leader, and she's one of our Twinkl Geography content writer and editors. And she said one of her favourite mapping activities was messy maps. She said the word messy can sound daunting, but it's a great way of introducing map skills and scale. She said she'd get her year 1 classes to create an aerial map of the classroom using resources from around the classroom, cubes, blocks, shapes, pencils, absolutely anything to represent the tables, chairs, etc. And it can easily be adapted to other year groups too, mapping the local area, fieldwork sites, and is so much fun for all. Kate is also one of our content writers and experienced geography teacher, and she enjoyed studying the local area. One of her favourite mapping activities was when they studied maps for a local area project, and children were given historical and new OS maps and spent time comparing the similarities and differences and annotating and noticing the changes in their local settlement, thinking of the reasons why this might be. This was a great way for children to use their mapping skills to notice growth in settlements and change in land use over time. Nicola is also one of our geography content writer editors, and she did school grounds pirate mapping. So one of her favourite mapping activities was inspired by a wonderful picture book about pirates, and she gave the children a plan of the school grounds and a gold chocolate coin, a doubloon. Hiding their doubloon for a friend to find, they transformed their plan into a treasure map with symbols, a key, landmarks, and a cross for X marks the spot. They dressed as pirates, and the children swapped maps and followed each other's marked routes. And she was delighted that they'd learnt about creating and reading maps in such a purposeful way, and they were thrilled to find their treasure at the end of it. Sarah is also an experienced teacher and our Twinkl Geography content writer stroke editor. She liked it, again, doing activities about the local area. And one of her favourite mapping activities was exploring the local area with her class. She said they spent quite a lot of some time in the classroom learning about OS symbols, drawing maps, learning about scale, and planning a route for a walk in their local area. And they then took their skills into the real world. And the children loved following their maps, walking around the village, identifying local landmarks, and just being outdoors. She said it was a really simple activity, but everyone really enjoyed themselves. And that's where I'm finishing up today. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found all that information useful and that it wasn't too much to take in. And I really appreciate you joining us today.